Have you ever been taught that struggling is a bad thing? And have you ever felt belittled because you weren't as smart as other kids? Everyone knows what it feels like to feel less smart because you didn't understand something that other kids did. I've personally felt this many times in school, and I always considered struggling to be a bad thing until I learned the way that Eastern cultures approach this. Schools in Eastern cultures teach that struggle is okay, and they view intelligence as an effect instead of a cause, which is why Western schools need to begin incorporating these types of views into their education. Before I explain more, here are some of the main differences between Eastern and Western cultures. Eastern cultures include Asian countries like China and India, and Western cultures include countries in North and South America and Europe. According to an article written by Jean Lao Chan called Eastern and Western Learning Styles in March of 2016, one of the main differences between education in the two cultures is that Eastern education is associated with traditionalism, while Western education is associated with modernism. Joyce Jin says in her article, The Differences Between Western and Eastern Education, that Eastern cultures tend to have a teacher-centered classroom, while Western education cultures use student-centered classes. So these are the well-known differences between Eastern and Western education, but the method of education is the reason that the West should take on some of these aspects. One of the main aspects of Eastern education that the West should take on is the response to struggle. In Western cultures, struggle is seen as a weakness, so students feel frustrated when they encounter it, and they are more likely to give up quicker. In Eastern cultures, struggle is seen as a measure of strength, and it is an essential tool to their learning, so students are more resilient when faced with challenges. According to an article written by Staff Reports in October of 2017 called The Differences Between Eastern and Western Education, Eastern schools teach the belief that discipline can outweigh any academic difficulty. They believe that effort is the most important aspect of learning. Jim Stigler was a graduate student who went to Japan to observe teaching methods in classroom. In one instance, he observed a student who was struggling in class when they were learning how to draw 3D cubes. So the teacher noticed, and she asked him to put his cube on the board. Now, this was interesting to Stigler because in American classrooms, it's usually the successful kid that the teacher uses as an example. So the student in this instance worked in front of the class, and he struggled for a really long time, but eventually he finally got it on his own. This showed how struggling was acceptable in the classroom and even encouraged, because eventually when the child finally understood, he felt a sense of accomplishment because he did that himself. Stigler also did an experiment with American students and Japanese students to measure their tolerance to struggling. All the students were given an impossible math problem. The American students worked on the problem for 30 seconds before saying that they didn't know how, but the Japanese students worked on it for an hour before they were finally told that the problem was impossible. This small study shows a significant difference between the students and the cultures. The Japanese students showed more resilience and were determined to complete the problem. The ability to persist and the tolerance for struggling are things that should be stressed even more in Western cultures. This will make the children more successful when they're faced with challenges. The other aspect of Eastern cultures that should be considered more by Western educators is the idea of intelligence. According to an article written by Alex Spiegel called Struggle for Smarts, How Eastern and Western Cultures Tackle Learning, in November of 2012, the West sees intelligence as more of a cause. In an observation made by Jin Lee of an American mother and son, the son was explaining to his mom how he and his friends talk about books at recess. The mom responded, "You know that's what smart people do, smart grown-ups?" And so the child said, "I know, they talk about books." The mother responded, "Yeah, so that's a pretty smart thing to do, is to talk about a book." And the child responded, "Mm-hmm." In this exchange between the mother and child, you see how intelligence is seen as a cause. She's saying that because he's smart, he talks about books. She's saying that there's something inside of him that makes him smart, and that's the reason that he does well in school. But in contrast, Eastern cultures see intelligence as an effect. Because a student works hard and studies, they are more intelligent. When Jin Lee listened to a conversation between a Taiwanese mother and her 9-year-old son, she observed a much different view. They were talking about the piano. The boy won first place in a competition, and the mother is explaining to him why. She says, "You practice and practice with lots of energy. It got really hard, but you made it a great effort. You insisted on practicing yourself." See, the Eastern view of intelligence is that one that makes more sense, and it encourages everyone to be smart, not just the students who succeed immediately. This poses the idea that anyone can be smart, even if they try hard enough. So while there are many good aspects to Western education, there are also many ideas that the West should incorporate into their system from Eastern cultures to encourage the kids to be better students and more persistent. According to an article written by Aminuddin Hassan and Nur Shahada Jamaluddin called "Approaches and Values to Two Gigantic Educational Philosophies, East and West," in 2010, the best educational approach to learning is one that includes ideas from both cultures. Education is one of the most important aspects of culture. It is what shapes the minds of young kids who will be future leaders. So changes should always be made when necessary, and there are many changes that can improve the U.S. by incorporating ideas from Eastern cultures.